fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire.
Fuel, the podcast for fixing underperformance and evolving leadership within the automotive industry. Fuel is bringing you the latest in proven strategies and techniques that can take your service department to the next level.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Fuel Podcast. Today I've got Mr. Grogan back on the show with me. How you doing, brother?
Hey, happy to be back. I thought you didn't like me anymore. It's been a minute.
Well, you're kind of a busy guy.
Never too busy for you. Never too busy for you.
There we go. I've got it recorded, so there we go. Well, James, hey, if you don't mind, just kind of reiterate for the listeners out there, who you are, title, kind of years in the industry.
Yeah, James Grogan, Senior Vice President of Client Success with Dynatron Software. Been with Dynatron Software for almost a decade and a little over 20 years automotive experience as well. So, kind of did a little aftermarket, worked in the dealership, service advisor, manager, FOD over a couple points. So did a little bit of everything.
Nice. I mean, so would you say things have changed a little bit from 20 years ago?
I think they've changed from 3 years ago. But yes. The industry has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years, let alone the last 20.
Well, what I think is really interesting is the dynamic of what we used to do as a practice and in how it always seems to be ever changing and ever evolving. We used to handwrite tickets. That was a pretty easy practice, right? Mm-hmm. And how we used to file certain, ROs, with the dual copies and that kind of stuff. And even with warranty claims, having stacks and stacks and stacks and stuff of warranty claims. And now it just seems that everything is becoming more organized and more optimized as far as like with technology and things of that nature. So what are some of the things that you can, from your experience, have kind of seen in that past as far as what we used to do things, and then how technology has started to change that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, just operationally, right? Writing up the customer. I mean, how was the appointments 15 years ago, right? We didn't have any. Now you have a scheduler where you can pretty much plan your day accordingly. You think about technology from a pre-write aspect, right? Unless you were the one that Mrs. Jones called or Mr. Jones called and they showed up, you had no idea why they were in. Now we have a pre-write where not only do we know why they're in, what's going on, but we also have the recommended services, declined services, and everything else that we should be discussing with them too. And I mean, you can kind of take that and walk through almost every step of transactional process and fixed ops. I think one of the other big things too is, you made reference to writing ROs and how we used to have to do the duplicate copies and all that stuff. Think about how hard it was to figure out where you were not performing back in those days, right?
Yeah.
Because all you had was paper. So all you could do is paper, spreadsheet, math, journal book, right? And what technology has done nowadays is for us to be better prepared, have better insight to our business, and become a lot more proactive in performance aspects than we've ever been before.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of FOD, service managers, general managers, and when they're talking about the performance of their people, he does a good job. He's very well liked. He shows up, he gives me good numbers. But as far as like when you start to use the analytics, like when you start to use data, mm-hmm. It really starts to dig into, well, yeah, I'm glad everybody likes him, but maybe everybody likes him because he gives them a discount, And I'm glad you see that he's bringing you in dollars and he's doing stuff for you, but does he understand what being profitable means and how that aspect is? So yeah, I would agree 100%. I mean, it goes from kind of I would say more of like a visual aspect of the feel of how everything's going on to now it's more granular to say this is what's happening.
I also think it allows you to separate culture from performance.
Yeah.
Right. Because, anybody who's worked retail has had that person on their service drive or on their sales floor that shows up early, is a great attitude, friendly to everybody. All the employees love them. All the customers love them, right? And so the people like, well, why wouldn't I want 10 of those? Well, and then you look at their performance and you're like, okay performance, mediocre at best, right? And it allows you to make a decision based on either culture or performance. Maybe having one or two of those is great, but I don't want 10 of them, right? And so understanding that just because somebody has a great personality, is a great cultural fit, that doesn't always mean they're a top performer as well. And being able to split those things, I think technology has really allowed us to see that, and really also establish where that individual is an underperformer so that, we can coach them up.
I mean, I think in the aspect of that, you're looking at all this information, right? We're talking about the progression of data. What's data doing in the automotive industry, basically? But, there's so much data that we have, and they're like, look at what all we can give you. I think the biggest thing, most people I talk to and how we understand that is, where do you start? And where do you start to put that aspect as far as a focus? So there's so much information, but how do you start to interpret it? How do you have it at a basic level? And I think being able to correlate, like you said, you start to push away the culture side of it to begin with, and just look at the profitability standpoint. Where do we need to be profitable, and how do we need to get there?
Yeah, I think, one of the greatest things about data is having it. One of the worst things about data is having it, because you can have too much to where, you're going in and you're trying to find an area that you could perform better in. And then 35 minutes to an hour later, you're looking at something completely out of left field because you went down a rabbit hole. I mean, we've all done it, right?
Doing that 7 layers of Kevin Bacon. I know what you're talking about.
So I think one of the biggest things is, understanding that, data is only good if it's actionable, right? And really having a sense of, okay, whatever I'm about to spend my time looking at, I need to make sure that I'm actually going to go do something with it.
Right.
And like a mental check, right? So, I don't care about how many cars I see every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at, what am I going to go do with that? Nothing. But if I'm looking at it, if that started with looking at one line ROs or high mileage opportunities, and I know that if I find that and I have a direct vision, like, okay, if I find data here, I'm going to go do this. Then once you find that data, stop. Don't keep digging, because then you're only going to then dig, and the thing you meant to go do, you'll never get it done.
Well, exactly. No, I mean, it's, what is it? Paralysis by analysis, right? We look at so many different factors, and I always like to make the joke, it's like putting frogs in a bucket. But the idea of it is, there's so many factors, like, where do you put your focus, and I would say controllables. Let's focus on what we can control. Let's control the controllables first, and then we can start bringing in the other stuff. And every time somebody starts to talk to me about where do I start, I've got all this information, I've got all this data. It's kind of simple if you just break it down pretty easy. It's kind of in relation to what you were talking about. Essentially, what are we trying to do? What am I trying to do with this data, first off? And then an aspect of that would be, how do I want to see it? How do we need to see that kind of that breakdown? And then what do I want to see? What exactly that is. So if you said, for instance, I want to see vehicles that come in Wednesday at 2 p.m. and what they're doing, then okay. That gives you a path of being able to use the data. So I think anytime we talk about data in the automotive industry, being able to communicate with somebody like a coach from Dynatron or a mentor or somebody who understands and can interpret the data, you got to have a process of saying, kind of, what do I want to see? How do I want to see it? But then ultimately, what are we trying to do with this?
And I think another good resource is to understand that what I'm going to look at today, is it a pencil and eraser change? Is it something I can implement today and see an immediate change tomorrow? Or is it a behavior change? And I think the reason that's important is because if I go in and I'm looking for something and I, in my mind, go, this is an immediate change, I can make this change today and have it impact tomorrow, then guess what? I'm going to go do it. But if it's a behavior change where I know I'm going to have to work with people, I'm going to have to coach, I'm going to have to train, how long is that going to take before you see impact? Right? So if I could find one or two pencil and eraser changes and having an impact today that affects tomorrow, I would rather get those than spend my time looking for a behavior change that I know might take 6, 8, 10 weeks.
Yeah, you can't cash smiles. So
yeah.
So hey, one of the things I like about the podcast is every once in a while we get somebody dropping in on us. Bill, you there, brother?
What's happening?
Hey, welcome back, man. Welcome back to the show. I got Mr. Grogan with us today too.
Mr. Grogan, amazing. How are you?
Good to see you. Good to see you.
All right, just for the listeners, everything. I got Mr. Demery just jumped in with us. Hey, just go ahead and introduce yourself one more time. I mean, just for people who maybe haven't heard our podcast already.
Yeah, Bill Demery. I'm the corporate director of fixed operations for the Tom Wood Auto Group, based out of Indianapolis. I'm a very lucky guy to be on this wonderful podcast invitation.
Yeah, so kind of what we were jumping into, we talked about, years of experience. James was talking about being in the business for 20 years. And we talked about kind of, things have changed. And he said, well, I think things have changed in the last 3 years, or last 3 weeks. That's what he was talking about, and how fast that ongoing change is. And then we started to get into that aspect of like data analytics, right? Like how much more has data been able to do for our business? And then what James is really bringing up a good point of is separating culture, right, from business. It's like, here's your culture side that you can model, but then here's the business side. We kind of made the aspect of that. So, in your years of experience, I mean, what would you say has been the biggest impact or shift in the automotive industry with data and with analytics?
I think with the data points, things that we didn't used to have. You would look out the front door, you see 10 cars, think, it's going to be an okay day. Now we know the value of each of those cars. If we do a media, if we do a good walk around, if we do an inspection, we can almost tell you what the dollar points are going to be because we know the average miles that are coming into our stores. So the data is really, I think, help us understand the business more as a business than it has. Yeah, it's a customer experience, and we have guests, and we have all these things. And you'd walk in, flip a coin. Am I going to have a good day? We know what kind of day we're going to have because we control that in the fixed ops. And that's what's fun about, I think, fixed ops versus variable. And my counterpart, BKE, we punch each other around a little bit. But I tell our team, we just had a fixed ops meeting recently, is we control our destiny. They don't. We have customers that come in and we determine what is the value of that customer. Variable doesn't have that. Well, they know compressions of gross, the compressions of the cars and the values, they are what they are. Where if we use the data points of, we know the value of a ticket if we close 35% of every brake job that's offered. We know the value of the ticket if we close 25% of every alignment opportunity we have. We know this because the data has told us over the years, and it's more front and center now because of the technology and the systems that we're able to use to pull it.
So when you're building that process, like you just said, like if we close 35% on brake jobs, right? Or brake fluid exchanges or whatever we're looking at in that metric. I mean, coming from like being introduced to technology, if you're kind of being introduced to kind of the concept you're talking about, what would you say were the adolescent stages of that as you were being introduced, and what was your focuses?
Originally our focus was when we were able to start getting that data readily available, easy, right? The old school, back in my day, 37 years ago, you had to do 100 RO count and pull them and pencil everything down and write down. Well, now I can run a quick report through EBIS and have it to you in about 10 seconds. And I know because if we look at what a ticket value is, say on a brake job, and Johnny over here closes 10% of his, Jimmy over there closes 60% of his. What's the difference between the two? They have the same opportunity, same customer, same miles, same everything that's coming in. And by having that data, you can't just say, Johnny over here just really sucks. No, Jimmy just knows what he's doing. So why not put Johnny next to Jimmy and teach him your word points, and you can run the data points and watch his closing ratio go up, because now you have a very direct, focused effort on one individual out of 70. I know my bottom 10 advisors in our entire organization. I can tell you exactly the bottom 10 people that I need my team to focus on. These folks need help for whatever reason. Let's go in and help them because the data says they can't close brakes.
Well, so James, back to, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So James, back to you. I mean, it sounds like Bill has figured out a way to kind of marry the gap between that cultural aspect and the analytical aspect. So what's your take on kind of what he's talking about?
No, I agree. When we talked about culture, we were talking about the guy or the woman in your dealership that's a great personality, everybody loves, right? Is always happy, always on time, stays late, takes care of the customer. But from a performance aspect, it's just, mediocre or not, or, needs areas. And, before it was, hey, I would fill my show with 10 people like that because they were just great to work with. Once we were able to see performance, especially dialed in metrics, now it's like, wait a minute, I got some areas that, yes, they check all these cultural boxes, but from a performance aspect, I know there's areas I need to work with. And I think, it's more important than it is nowadays that, having people and having the ability to understand where they're performing well, where they're not performing, and instead of trying to train them on everything, like you were saying, Bill, specifically, like, how do we fix brakes? How do I get Johnny to sell brakes better? Instead of like, well, how do I get Johnny better? Right. Well, once again, that's human behavior, right? That's a long process. But if I can go, how do I get Johnny to do brakes? Oh, hey, Jimmy, dude, I'm going to sit him next with you. Johnny, whatever he does with brakes, do that. Right. But you would have never seen that if we didn't have the technology and the way to dive into it. All we know is that Jimmy's better than Johnny. And then we'd have to pull, probably 300 repair orders to figure
exactly
out, right? And I think the other part about too, with technology too, is now that we've made that, now we can track the growth. So we can actually, when we're sitting with Johnny, we can actually then start to encourage him, like, hey, you went from 10%, dude, you're at 17%, you're at 25%, and before, not having that readily available, it became very hard to coach people really effectively because you didn't know where they were all the time. But now that you can, every week you can be having that discussion.
Well, I mean, so in that aspect, I mean, when is it too much data? Like James said something earlier, the best thing is we have all this data. And he says the worst thing is we have all this data, which is a pretty cool aspect of what he brought up. So like, how do you get your assessment, when you're looking at this, you're being introduced to it, how do you get that understanding? Hey, that's enough for now, even though there's more, and we'll get to more.
Yeah, I can tell you from my perspective, and just the things the books I've read and just training in general is, once you're focusing on more than three things, life gets very difficult, right? And we say here in Dynatron, we say you focus on three, more than three things, you're focusing on nothing, and it's because you can't move around. You're just not. We're not built like that. So what I would always do is just pick one, maybe two, and that's it, and keep it simple, right? We talked about pencil and eraser changes, right? Can I change something today to impact tomorrow, or is it a behavior change that I know is going to take a while? And maybe pick one of each. But I think the moment you try to fix everything, you fix nothing. So pick one, maybe two things. Pick one that you think you can impact pretty quick. Pick another one that you think is going to take a little bit longer, and then make decisive action, right? And we were talking about, it's all great, but if you come in and you have no action plan, then don't look at the data. Have an action plan, then go find it in the data. So my feedback.
What do you think, Bill? Is that kind of your take on it as well?
It is. And I look at which ones are going to be more meaningful, whether it's a customer experience or profitability. So if you look at all the different data points that we have, and this one over here doesn't really affect those two. So the sales guys, their thing is, does it sell more cars? Mine is, does it sell more hours? And if it doesn't sell more hours, or it's not taking care of a customer, that's the wrong thing to be focusing on. So I try to pull, one or two. I'm a very similar, threes max. As big as our group is, I'll grab on to, I spent one whole year chasing one specific metric, and where it drove Jeff Wood maybe a little bit crazy because we weren't getting this over here. Mike, I got to fix this before I can go to that next metric. And we do that next year, not next month, next year. It's a year-long process. We spent a whole year making sure that more than 90% of the time, every service advisor in our organization sent an ASR estimate via text or email. 90% of the time, minimum, that has to happen. Well, that took us a year to get that momentum and get it going. Once we got that done, then we can start shooting videos and pictures. There's no point in shooting videos and pictures first because you're not sending it via text or email. So we got to do them one at a time. And now we're 94.3% media on every ASR. So it's taken 2 years to get where we're at. And then now this year, we're auditing 10 pictures, videos per store every day, and to make sure the quality, so we can get a better quality picture and video. We're doing them, we're sending them, they're there. Now, how good are they? It's been 3 years, and this isn't a baby step thing. So I take them kind of a bite at a time that builds a big chunk. and the valuation of it is enormous. If you can take a closing ratio from 32 to 37% on a $9 million ask, it's a lot of money. And we're doing it by doing these steps by the data.
Oh yeah. I mean, so like in like kind of like a spinoff or kind of like a takeaway, like you said, you're utilizing it that way to focus on that one key aspect. But, kind of flipping the point, when we have all this data and people aren't utilizing it, what do we kind of see as the biggest proponent of them not? It's in front of you and you have access to it, but why aren't you using it? So where do we think that disconnect is?
I find it's usually buy-in. And if they're not bought into it, we can coach, we can give them the book, we can read the book to them. But
I want pictures in my book, Bill. I want pictures and crayons and things like that.
I can give you an example. I'm a UVI guy. I have UVIs in 11 stores. And UVI in March of this year produced 337 bulged tires that had a bulge on them within our group. 337 tires came in our store that had a bulge. 332 tires left our stores with the same bulge. Why would that, and how could that possibly happen? So we have the data that tells us every day that this car has a bulge in it. We either consciously making a decision to not look at it, not address it with our team, and not hold people accountable because we're too busy. We've got everything else going on. The phones are ringing. Customers are lined up. Bill, you want us to do a walk around. Bill, you want media. You want all these things done. Oh, now you want us to look at a bulge in a tire or something. In my 37 years has never been identified in a tire with a machine that now identifies it. It puts it out and flashes it at you. So we just had to have a kind of a culture change come to, meeting a few weeks ago that now I'm looking at every single bulge that comes in and I'm watching and I'm looking at tickets. Did we sell a tire? Is there a reason that you constantly chose to allow a car to, in an unsafe condition, leave this dealership and get on the highway? And you personally decided, I'm going to accept the liability if an accident happens. If you start thinking about it that way, I think we're going to start looking at the bulges, and I'm curious at the end of this month to see how many of those we captured. But it's pushback from, I'm just too busy. There's a lot going on. We have a lot of systems, a lot of tools, a lot of things. Some days I wish we could get back to my days. We had a number 2 pencil. We had the little, tear off pages, and we hand wrote things down on repair orders. But it was easy. I still had a 2.5 RO average back in the 80s by handwriting. We still have a 2.5 RO average today, and they get everything. And it's a process, and it's an ownership. And do you decide to do it or you're not?
James, you think that's kind of along the same mindset you have as far as like, if you have all this data and you're not utilizing it? Bill says, it's buy-in and it's time management, essentially. Bill, is that correct in that assessment?
Yeah.
It's like, it's buy-in, it's time management. I ain't got time for this. Okay. So is that kind of what you're seeing as well, or is it a little bit different aspect?
I think buy-in, first of all, because if they're not bought in that the data is going to help them, they won't even look at it, right? If they don't see, if they're not bought into the value, it doesn't matter to them. I think the other thing on that to buy-in is probably number one. The second part of that, I think, is a little bit of fear. And what I mean by that is because they bought in, they know the data is valuable, but they don't understand what they're looking at sometimes. And I think sometimes we make and Bill, you probably know it better being closer to retail than us. Like sometimes we forget that, a lot of our managers, they came up in the dealership and stepped up through the realms, but really haven't had a ton of financial training so that when they look at data, they understand it. Right. And so I think it's buy-in is definitely the first thing. Buy-in gets you in the door, right? Buy-in gets them opening the reports, gets them looking at it. I think the next thing is, I don't know if fear is the best word. I think maybe lack of knowledge and not seeing the data and going, okay, I know that's bad. I just don't know what to do. And I think when you're put in a position where you have to admit yourself that you don't know what to do, human nature is going to say, I'm going to stay away from that, because that's going to show that I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to focus on this. And so I think buy-in, you got to get them, they have to be engaged. Second part is they have to either, one, feel comfortable to raise their hand and say, hey, listen, this is great, but I don't know what to do. Or two, we have to have something in place that says, hey, listen, here's the reports. And if you see this, almost have a process in place of how they should be handling the data. if you think about how we train some of the coaches, right? We give them the reports and we walk them through, hey, if this is red, this is usually where it is. Okay. So now that you see this based on your experience, what should we do? Right. And so I think there's the buy-in, and then I think there's the knowledge base. And I think usually if you can cross those two off, now it's just a matter of, do I have the time to do something with it? Like Bill was saying. And that's, to me, that's really the only concerted decision, right? Because I'm bought in, I made that, I have the knowledge, that's a tool, it's a skill. Now I just have to make the decision if I'm going to go do something with it. So,
and do you think and I guess I'm asking the question, maybe Alex, I'm the co-host here.
there you go.
You're getting pretty close. I'll give you that.
So do you think though, you have the data, you export the data, and you have no clue what to do with it. You don't know how to run a pivot table.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how to filter sort it. You don't know how to do anything with it other than what prints. And I find sometimes a deer in the headlight look when I say, hey, did you pull the data and tell me why such and such ELR is lower than the other person? Can you look at that and tell me? And a lot of times I get the kind of just stare.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you see it as well, that how many managers, how many leaders have been trained in leadership? They become a manager because somebody threw a key in. But do they study leadership? Do they read any type of books, intentional mindset books, Dave Anderson books, ways to get better in themselves? And have they ever taken a course in Microsoft to control email, to dissect an Excel sheet and work these systems?
Yeah, no, that's great feedback, because that's actually something we've implemented in our training, just from our teams. But I think across the dealership, if we look across automotive, Excel skills, okay, I download it, I can put a filter. Pivot table, trend report on Excel, really not, right? And really not. And really, I think what a lot of times is dealerships lean on the technology to assist in areas they weren't trained, right? Like, I don't know how to do this, so I just want a report that shows me trends, because that way I don't have to download it and do anything. And I think, so one, when it does that, but doesn't do that to exactly what you need, well, then you work with it. Well, this is the best I got. Instead of, no, let's download it to an Excel, add a date filter, insert whatever. The second part of that is leadership. Leadership to me is it's one of my hot buttons. I love it. I'll talk about it all day long. I read a ton of books. I listen to a ton of podcasts. And I think the biggest area in general in automotive is, we give people autonomy to run a service department, parts department, whatever. We say, hey, listen, it's your team, go do it. And then we ask them every month, hey, how about this? How about this? How about that? And we never, and I say we collectively as a industry, right?
Industry, yeah.
We never really go, hey, listen, you're a brand new manager. Here's 3 books or something like you should listen. So like, big one for us is extreme ownership, right? Like extreme ownership, Good to Great is another couple books. I could go down the list, right?
Okay.
But we never hand that information to them and say, hey, listen, I want you to read this, and we're going to talk about it once a week, right? Or every 2 weeks, whatever. And we don't give them the tools to lead, and then the education, I guess, like from your part with the Excel, to be functional. And so that's when I think that fear and that lack of knowledge comes in, because they know they should do something with it. They know I should be able to understand this, but they don't. And I think that's a huge area of opportunity. Leadership to me is first and foremost.
All right, so that wrapped this up for this episode of the Fuel Podcast. James, Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And like I always do, I would love for you guys to have like the kind of the final say. Anything you guys want to talk to the listeners about, pertaining to what we went into today, or just anything you want to put out into that ether. So Bill, what you got for me? Final thoughts.
Yeah, hey, thanks. First of all, it's always so much fun talk shop with you guys, and to have James on as well. It's a great podcast. And, I just tell anybody, invest in yourself. if you don't take the time to invest in yourself, you can never run a quality, solid team. So do what you have to do to invest in your future and what you're trying to do when you're trying to run your store. So great points on the data. I love data as well. And don't get overwhelmed with it. Take 1 or 2 items from it and run with it.
James, what you got for me, brother?
So along the same lines, we all have data. I think the number one thing takeaway from here is, one, what are you going to do with it? Make it actionable. But 2, make sure that the people you've put in charge of the data are trained and have access to ongoing training so that they can always be bettering themselves and bettering their skills. Because if we have the data and they increase their skills on that data, we're all going to get better. So other than that, always great to talk with you. Bill, it's finally good. It's good to see you. Alex, don't wait, 8 months to have me back. And just excited. So.
All right, guys. Thank you so much again. This will conclude this episode of the Fuel Podcast. We'll catch you next time. See ya. Thank you for joining another episode of the Fuel Podcast. Always be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to be notified when new episodes are being dropped. And click the link below to review any of the show notes for additional information. Or you can email the Fuel Podcast with the link, as we encourage any feedback or any questions or comments from our listeners. Until next time, I'm your host, Alex Keys, with the Fuel Podcast for fixing underperformance and evolving leadership.